Okay, so I did a video about a high spinning wedge trick a few months ago. Did a collaboration with Mr. Shortgame. He also put out a video on that same subject. But ever since then, I've been getting a lot of questions, which makes me realize I think I didn't really explain it as well as I probably should have or could have. So this video, I'm going to be talking about what we did in that video, why we did it, and how you can take that and apply it to your own golf bag, your own club setup. So let's go. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Clubmaker. I'm AJ. I hope you're having a wonderful day. So this topic definitely got some people a little bit confused, and a lot of people just sort of took the 8-iron portion of the video and just kind of latched onto that. And that by itself isn't necessarily going to get you what you're looking for. In fact, if you don't do this the proper way, just using that 8-iron shaft could actually give you the opposite result of what you were hoping for. So instead of high spin, low launch, you might end up getting lower spin and higher launch. So first off, let's cover exactly what we did in those videos. Okay, so the video was comparing two different shafts, right? The first shaft was your stock dynamic gold, either S400 or S200 wedge shafts that you get with any number of different wedges when you buy them just sort of off the rack, right? That's the stock setup with a lot of these wedges. And what we were comparing that to, or what we pitted that against, was a dynamic gold 8-iron shaft, but in an extra stiff flex. So where the first shaft was an S400, meaning stiff, the 8-iron shaft we used was actually an extra stiff. That is one of the most important parts of this whole idea, is you have to make sure you have a stiffer shaft. From there, we did everything else the same. We installed them the exact same way. Another question I've been getting is about the length of it, how you cut it. Now remember, these are all taper tip shafts that we're talking about here, right? Taper tip hosel, and you have a taper tip shaft, which means you can buy a specific 8-iron shaft, 9-iron shaft, all the way through the bag. So what we were doing there is taking the 8-iron shaft, basically just taking that, like this. This is an 8-iron shaft in an extra stiff, little different weight, but taking this shaft, installing it into the head, and then just cutting it from the butt end down to the final playing length, which in this case was the exact same length as the standard off the rack setup. So when you did those two things, again, this was 8-iron in a dynamic gold. This is the other important piece. It was dynamic gold specific, and we will come back to that. But when you have an extra stiff dynamic gold 8-iron, and we're comparing it to the standard dynamic gold stiff wedge shaft, that is where we saw the results. That is where we saw the spin numbers jump up and the launch angle go down. Okay, so that's the what we did. Next is, well, why did we do it? And it all comes down to the stiffness, because the X100 8-iron shaft, the key to this whole thing, the crux of it, is that shaft is slightly stiffer than the stock S400 shaft. What that means is, at impact, whereas the shaft will usually have a little bit of forward deflection, right? It sort of bends forward at impact. And what happens is that improves or increases the amount of loft that you see at impact, the dynamic loft. Now, dynamic loft, you would think, will equal more spin, but in fact, with the modern golf balls and with the amount of angle, the loft on your higher lofted wedges, what you actually see is the ball can't really grab on and get a lot of spin. It just sort of glances off there. So you get a high launching but lower spinning shot. So what we're doing with the stiffer shaft option, the X100, is you're getting less forward deflection, thereby getting less lofted impact, and what you see is lower launch but more spin. That is how it works. That is why what we're trying to do is get something a little bit stiffer. It's not the 8 iron. The 8 iron just by itself is not what makes it work, is not what gives you more spin. In fact, if you went and just had the stiff version of that 8 iron instead of the extra stiff, again, you would get the opposite result because the shaft would be whippier, you would get more forward deflection, higher loft, lower spin. Okay, what we did and why we did it. Finally, how can you apply this to your own game? And the most important thing to remember here is do not get fixated on the 8 iron specifically, because the 8 iron is really only what you want to focus on if we're talking about dynamic gold shafts. The reason is because dynamic gold only makes down to a 9 iron specific taper tip shaft. So if you are building a set of irons and you want dynamic gold shafts, you would buy the 4 iron shaft for the 4 iron, the 5 for the 5, all the way down. However, when you get to the 9 iron, that's the shortest shaft they make. So you're going to get the same shaft whether it's going in a 9, a pitching wedge, or any of your high lofted wedges. Now those higher lofted wedges, the pitching wedge, all get heavier. They're all heavier headed, and that can give you more flex and more forward deflection, i.e. more loft, i.e. less spin. So that is why, because 9 iron is the shortest option that they make, that we talk about an 8 iron, because we're going from that shortest option, we're taking one step back and we're going up a flex. So instead of 9 iron stiff, we're going 8 iron extra stiff. Now why that matters is because a lot of us aren't playing dynamic gold. We may be using KBS or Nippon or Aerotech or any number of other brands. And in most of these other brands, they not only make a 9 iron shaft, but they make a pitching wedge shaft, which means you don't use the same 9 iron shaft all the way through. You can go 9 iron shaft in your 9 iron and pitching wedge shaft in your pitching wedge and into your other wedges. If that is the case, then in order to do the same thing, in order to go through the same process here, we wouldn't go from 9 to 8, we would go from pitching wedge to the 9 iron shaft. So instead of having, say, a stiff pitching wedge, we would have the extra stiff 9 iron shaft in that same shaft model. And that's why it's really important. Again, don't focus on the 8 iron. The 8 iron by itself is not the important point. The important point is that we're going one step back in number, and we're also going one flex up. So depending on your current setup and depending on what you're trying to do and matching weights and things like that into your wedges, that's what you need to make sure you know and make sure you understand is don't assume it needs to be an 8 iron shaft, because in many, many cases, you will already have a dedicated pitching wedge shaft in there, which means you don't want the 8 because that won't give you the same results. You want one step back, the 9 iron shaft. Okay, second time is a charm. Hopefully this made a little bit more sense this time. Hopefully you have a little better grasp of what we're doing and why we did it. And hopefully you understand now a little better how you can apply it to your own game. Again, it's not the 8 iron. The 8 is not the magic number here. The 8 is only used because of the specifics of how Dynamic Gold builds their shafts. And if you have any number of other brands, then we're not going to be looking at an 8 iron shaft. You're probably going to be looking at a 9. If you enjoyed this video, please go down below, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I post new videos. You can find me on Instagram at Mobile Clubmaker, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.